Providence branch for sponsoring this series today. Today is the third in a three-part series on race and culture and adoption and foster care. We will be sending out a survey after the event today with a link. So please make sure you fill out the survey, especially I know some people, this is your third week with us. So we really want to know what other program you might be interested in, any other feedback you have. We'll also include the recording from today too, so you're able to access that. And I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators and panelists in a minute, but I first wanted to make sure that I thank our panelists and our facilitator, Michelle, Demetrius, Yolanda, Alexis, Justin, really for sharing your vulnerability and sharing your own personal experiences for other people to learn from, and acknowledging that your experiences are impacted by so many different factors. So even if we're hearing the stories of 5 people today, they don't represent just all of the experiences that youth might have in foster care and adoption when it comes to race, but we're hearing their very personal lived experiences. So I want to first acknowledge that and thank you all for sharing that. And for our participants, the Q&A feature is available as well. So if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to put it in the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can, but we apologize if we can't get to everything. And now I'm going to turn it over to our amazing facilitator, Michelle, also an amazing friend. Michelle's the head of talent and inclusion at IGT and works as the strengths coach for Leadership Rhode Island. Before IGT, she brought e-learning and classroom facilitation to Ocean State Job Lot and had consulting opportunities at Sensata Technologies, Fidelity, and Brown University, focused on learning and development and employee engagement. She's spent 10 years as the Director of Workforce Development for AAA Northeast, and she was honored in 2017 as by Providence Business News as a businesswoman, woman to watch. Michelle herself was adopted at the age of 10 as part of a transracial adoption in a town where she was one of the only children of color. And she's an avid volunteer, a guest speaker with Europe, and ran the 2018 and 2019 Boston Marathons. I'm always very envious of that, raising $67,000 for the program. She's also on the board and previously served as board chair of Youth Pride Rhode Island, and has served on the boards of Family Service of Rhode Island, the Newman YMCA, the Rhode Island Society of Human Resource Management, and Foster Forward. She received her BS in marketing from Johnson & Wales and an MA in adult education from the University of Rhode Island. But her most important accomplishment is her family, which is her husband, Mark, and her 2 children, Ava and Rowan, and dogs Lucy and Maisie, and cats Gracie and Susan. And Michelle has so much more to share. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Michelle.
I'm so sorry for the long bio, and we'll talk a little bit about this. I think that, a lot of us who have grown up in foster care and who have been adopted, we're a bit of overachievers at times. So, and I can't wait to talk more with this about that. I hate to start out such a panel like this with fiction, but something hit me this week that just resonated with me, and that is This Is Us. And it's on Tuesday nights on NBC. And if you haven't had a chance to check it out, when it comes to fiction being reality, Randall's experiences, having been an adoptee in a white family, I feel like they're writing that about what's in my brain. And in particular, there was a scene, it very much focused on what was happening with George Floyd, but it flashed back to his childhood. And there was a scene of a very similar experience where an African-American male was killed by the police. And he was sitting in his room and he was watching TV and he was experiencing this. And the rest of his family did not understand what he was going through, did not check on him and all of those things. And so as an adult, this episode this week was about him kind of reconciling that with his siblings and thinking about his experiences. And so having had a similar experience of having connected with my biological family and being in an adoptive home, that blew me away. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. I have had an amazing experience. When it comes to race, that's where there's more work to do. So I am in great company, and I have the pleasure of having on our panel today Alexis and Justin, Yolanda and Demetrius. And so what I'd like to do is have them all introduce themselves and talk about why this topic is so important for them to be here today. So I'd like to start out with Yolanda to share that with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody is having an awesome, amazing day. So my name is Yolanda Washburn Smith, and I am, like Selena mentioned, an educational advocate. I work with National Foster Youth Institute to help youth with staff consulting and preparing them for Shadow Day to basically shadow their Congress. And I'm also an education specialist here at ARI. So I'm super grateful for every opportunity and want to be here to basically use my voice and share how it's important to, for our youth to understand that it's possible to be successful. It's possible to overcome whatever you are going through. Your experiences do not define you. You can overcome any situation. Beginning of our story is just the beginning. It's just that, and identity is so important, race, especially in the climate that we're in. So I'm super excited to talk about it, and yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you, Yolanda. I'd like to now turn it over to Demetrius to share and introduce himself and why this is so important.
First and foremost, thank you once again, Michelle, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. And so, first, my name is Demetrius Napolitano. I spent my entire life, 22 years of my life, inside of New York City's foster care system. I was adopted twice, so one from an African-American family I moved into her home at 5, but I got adopted at 10. And then I got my second adoption was done by Italians it was finalized when I was 22. And so I have both of those experiences. And so now I am teaching mindfulness meditation and hatha yoga to youth in foster care to help them with their trauma. And as I continue to process my own trauma, and the reason why this is so important is because, as far as talking about race, especially in the foster care context, is because a lot of fear comes from, or excuse me, the lack of understanding comes from fear. Or is that the way? Fear comes from the lack of understanding. And when we think about a lot of parents who adopt children who are a different ethnicity from them, because they don't share that same cultural background and that upbringing, so they can produce a lot of fear. And I think that having these conversations are important to help bring this knowledge to the light, so that we can have a greater understanding of one another, especially in these times.
So I just wrote down a couple of things, fear and a greater understanding of one another. So we'll touch upon that. So thank you for that. Alexis, and if you would go next and share your experiences, and then Justin will follow.
Sorry, I was on mute. So I'm Alexis Black, and I'm the founder of The Scholarship Expert and co-author of Redefining Normal, is a book that we're publishing next month, which is actually on our journey of going through the foster care system and discovering healing, happiness, and love. And we touch on several of these topics, which is actually one of the main reasons why we wanted to be on this panel, just because myself being a white woman, how can I be an ally to those of people of color, and especially being married to a Black man? And then if we have children, they will be of color. So how can I continually be an ally and be an advocate in every space that I'm in, and realize maybe even the space that I take up, or when should I act in a certain role, and things like that, just understanding my role in everything. But then also the importance of representation with Black and brown youth in especially a family, like a white family. For an example, my little sister that my adoptive parents recently adopted, she's mixed, and her mom is white and her dad is Black. And so now we live in northern Michigan, where the entire community is white, and our family is white. And so how can we balance her background and the culture of her background with being in a white family, and having that representation through what she's seeing, what she's reading, and understanding that when she grows up, she will be a Black woman. And what does that representation mean, and what does that look like? So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Alexis. That's such a great perspective. And I think for the people who are in the audience who are considering adoption, that lens is so important. Justin, would you go next?
Yeah, so my name is Justin Black. I'm founder of the Rose Empowerment Group, and Rose stands for Rising Over Societal Expectations, and basically a company to help Black and Brown youth, or youth in general, but specifically with a focus on Black and Brown people, helping them rise over societal expectations that was set before us in society. Um, Co-author of the Redefining Normal book, Redefining Normal: How Two Foster Kids Beat the Odds and Discover Healing, Happiness, and Love. So a story just about statistics of what's placed on Black men in society and Black people in society, and foster youth as well, and how we were able to overcome through our journey, and also teach the lessons of how we were able to get through some of the typical situations that foster care youth go through, and also communication director of the scholarship expert. And one perspective that I bring to this panel, also I'm a foster youth from Detroit. I've been in the system since 9 years old. Grown up in Detroit since about 17 or 18 years old, when I went to a group home right outside of the city, and then went to Kalamazoo to attend Western Michigan University. So a perspective that I bring to this panel is just I've lived with Black families pretty much my entire time through foster care. A lot of times with family, transitioning from living with friends, transitioning to living in a group home where both house parents were Black. But the thing was that there was always a sense of I wouldn't say lack of training, but still always a lack of awareness of how to communicate with foster care youth. And as a Black community in general, if we want to be more supportive of young people in the community and Black people overall, when we're able to take in Black and Brown youth into our homes, not just saying, okay, this is a Black youth, I'm Black, you Black, we figure it out, but more saying of, this is still a foster care youth who has had certain experiences, and I need to approach this in a particular way. So Black and Brown people who are looking to foster, looking to adopt, still having the awareness and training and the knowledge to approach unique situations like fostering and adoption from a certain lens and perspective.
Thank you. And I know that we'll dig a little deeper into some of what that means. So I'd like for all of you to answer, what is the biggest lesson you learned from being in a transracial family about yourself and others? And if I'll just very briefly share the diversity work that I do in the workplace, I'm qualified for it because I have such a lens of perspectives. So I'll turn it over to Demetrius, if you could share, what's the biggest lesson that you learned?
Yeah, of course. So I got two. One, so I was, like I said, I was adopted by my African-American family when I was 10, moved in at 5, and then again, my second adoption. But in between, every summer for 2 weeks, I went to a Fresh Air Fund where I lived with an Amish family from 5 years old to 12. At the same time, I lived with my first adoption family. And so this time spending, although it was only 2 weeks, I was able to have a totally different experience, especially because in a lot of times in my first adoption, in my earlier years, I was severely neglected and abused. And so going from being ostracized and put to the side to now being the center of attention in this Amish community and my Amish family who still loves me very dearly. We have a great relationship. But what I learned was that the first thing, especially when we went to church on Sundays, was that I was different. And I learned this at 5, 6, 7 years old each year, because a lot of the children, the adults, everyone would more or less eventually stare at me. And so at that age, I was like, okay, why is everyone looking at me? And then it was like, clearly, as I look at the color of my skin. And so I remember running into the field, because it was on this huge grass field, and crying. And then eventually one of my Amish brothers or sisters, who of course were white, would come and comfort me. And so the second thing that I learned in this particular family, my Amish family, was that love is also blind, because it was in those moments where I felt insanely different because everyone was looking at me. It was also the same folks who shared that same ethnic and cultural background that came and comforted me and let me know that I was their family. And although, last thing I'll share was that my biological mother died when I was 10, but even before then, I didn't have too much of a relationship with her. And I maybe remember calling her mom once or twice. But the first woman that I remember calling mom was my Amish mother, my adopted grandmother, my first adoption. I called her grandma. But mom, the first person, was my Amish mother. And so the two things was that I wrote it down. I was different and love was blind to color.
That is so, I'm supposed to be the moderator here. I can't be getting emotional, but even in your voice when you said my Amish brothers and sisters, right? So that really speaks to the fact that love is blind. And I know from my own experience, I share that as well. And I'll share as we go throughout this panel discussion. Yolanda, if you could share yours, and you're on mute.
So I don't have a transracial experience. The foster parents that I had were African American, and it was a beautiful experience. I was able to learn a lot from them. I was able to grow from them. I was able to learn responsibility, how to love, and what it looks like to actually see an African American family be a strong African American family and have so much love for one another. And that's one of the things that I've learned a lot from, that it's possible for, especially as African American women, to see that, and for us to have integrity and to live beautiful lives despite, the odds and statistics. So yeah. You're on mute.
Thank you. We'll keep saying that to each other. I know, having been on a panel with you in the past, had a lot of people who have been part of your village, if we could be cliche. And there have been, I'm assuming, especially because everything is small, I'm assuming there's been a lot of people in your life who haven't been of color, who showed you that same concept that Demetrius mentioned, which is that love can be blind, right? Love is blind. And so, so I know that from your experience as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
That's absolutely true. I've been around so many people from the time that I was younger. That, for me, what Demetrius said is so true. Love is blind, and love is also, I feel like, transparent, and it's real, and it's genuine. It's beyond like what we can see outwardly. It's something that occurs inwardly, and it's a connection that you have with people. When I've came into contact with different people that have been such a great support to me, I never really necessarily looked at them outwardly. I just looked at the way that they treated me, the way that they were supportive to me, the way that they loved me. And it was never necessarily a race thing. It was more of something that, it was more deeper than just race and stuff like that. So yeah.
Thank you for that, Yolanda.
Of course.
Alexis and/or Justin, whichever one of you wants to go first and kind of share, your experiences with transracial adoption or fostering.
Yeah, so I think my experience is a little unique, mainly because I'm from Flint, Michigan, and all of my friends growing up, until I went into foster care, or really almost until I went to college, were all Black, and I was always the only white person. And so when I went into foster care, I moved in with my blood, I lived with my dad at that time, and I moved in with my blood family, where I was moved to pretty much an all-white PWI school area. And so that to me was really different. And then when situation happened, moved out of their house and moved in with my actual foster parents, it was also moving into another white family, which that wasn't necessarily what I was used to with all my friends, because I feel like I pretty much lived in my friend's house a lot of times growing up. I was always over there eating meals, staying the night, hanging out with friends. And so just moving into a home with a completely different culture than when I was growing up in. So that was something for me to really learn and adjust to. But then through that process, I learned the importance of being open for myself to love and receiving love, and then also the vulnerability that is required in a relationship, no matter if it's an intimate relationship or with a family. You have to be open and vulnerable for the relationship to work both ways, because they can pour into me, but if I'm not willing to receive that, then it's meaningless. Nope. Muted. You're muted.
That is so key, the vulnerability, right? And whatever trauma or kind of, we'll call it baggage that comes along with that. And I know, you know, it's hard when you know your parents, your biological parents, and then you're placed in this home. And so this ability and trust and that goes into that and plays into that as well.
Mhm.
Justin, if you could share a bit of your perspective.
Yeah, so I've grown up in, like I said, in a lot of Black households growing up until, well, pretty much throughout my foster care experience. And I would say getting into an interracial relationship and kind of being in this family where, you know, both of us are foster youth, and they have her parents, her now parents have an adopted youth. So they are familiar with the foster care system. But one of the biggest struggles that I've dealt with as it relates to being in an interracial relationship and being in foster care and marrying into a white family is that I still have a relationship with my biological family, and I've always had a relationship with my biological family throughout the foster care system, which is a huge thing within its own. You know, living in a foster home and then still wanting your parents, but your parents don't exactly, you know, want that responsibility as much, but you know, parenting when it's convenient. And you know, it was common for me to go to my parents' house for the holidays. And when I would go, I would just see so much toxic behavior, so many things that weren't healthy. And it got to a point where I just didn't want to be around as much. But when I got into a relationship with Alexis, and I started to more want to be around her family because it was more healthy and an open, honest environment, and healthy for me. My biological parents and family starts to view it as, oh, they're white and you want to be with your white family, and kind of not like the trauma that's in the situation, realizing the trauma and the toxicity within the situation, but more of just viewing it as the racial differences. And that is something that I had to kind of I had to break that way of thinking of, you know, the white family is the better family, or the white household is the better household, because that those ideas have ran through my biological family for a very long time. And it's hard because, you know, when you have younger siblings or younger nieces and nephews, you want to kind of teach them those ideas of, okay, you don't need to follow behind your you know, your dad or your grandma or mom, who is my mom. You don't have to follow behind those ideas and think it's acceptable, or think that white is good or black is bad, and the way we act and associate those behaviors with being black. It's kind of trying to teach the younger generation of my nieces and nephews the difference between the two. And it was hard for me to kind of separate the two as well and kind of explain that. So I think that was some of my issues dealing with interracial families.
Okay. My next question, and I'll open it up for whoever wants to take it, and it is around, did your non-biological parents keep you connected to your ethnic and cultural identity? And how important was that for your true sense of self? So think about that for a second, and I'll share a very short story. When I was young, my adoptive mother and I was very much into hip hop and Run DMC. I felt very much a connection to my blackness as a child. And I remember she went to Kmart and she bought me the whole Run DMC multi-tape set, right? And she brought that home, and I you know, that I remember that, and I remember that day, and I remember that feeling, and she you know, wanted me to have that. And if she had bought me one tape, I would say that that she was just trying to be nice, but she bought me the whole darn set. And so, and as a grandmother, I have a child who's transgender. She also makes bracelets for him with in the pride colors. And so for me, that's the same thing in my mind. So now I'll open it up to one of you to share, you know, how were you connected to yourself, whether or not it was a parent of non-biological parent of color or not. So whoever wants to take that, or I can certainly assign it. I know you're all thinking. That's a tough one. All right, think on that. I'll ask another question. How did your adoptive and/or foster parents help you feel like you belonged to your family? How did they help you feel like you belonged? So I'm
Are
gonna
you
go
belongs
ahead.
like in their family or belongs like, can you clarify that?
Belong, the way the question is worded is how you belonged in your family. So I'm going to assume that that's the adoptive or foster home. How did you, how were you given a sense of belonging?
I mean, I can go first. Nobody else wants to go. Okay. One of the things that my foster family did when I first moved in is they know how much I love food. And when I first moved in, I don't know, well, maybe based on that, but also she really believes in the idea of autonomy and you making your own decisions. And that was one of the biggest things for me, is because growing up with so many foster care workers and other people making decisions for you, that you don't really feel that you can make decisions for yourself. Unless it's negative, then you get the consequences. But outside of that, and one of the things that she did when I first moved in was she had a whiteboard on the fridge, and she said, whatever you want from the grocery store, write it down. And that just, I don't know, I think it's really roots to my love of food, but that just made me feel so welcome. And that also I had power in my choices. I could decide things for myself. It was just, there was just so much packed into that one little suggestion of write down what you want on the fridge. And it was just, I don't know why that still sticks with me today. And it's been 10 years since I've met them, but it always does.
And there's a comment in the chat about the fridge whiteboard hitting home. And so, you know, that in the option of choices. And I think that as adoptees or foster children, we're shocked at that when we get that in a home. And for myself, I know clean sheets was something that it was mind blowing to me. So others who'd like to share kind of what made you feel like you belonged.
For me, it was really I feel the same way too. I feel like food brings people together, like literally food always brings people together. But it was always also the love and the safety, and similar to just being allowed to be myself. I didn't have to be like change who I was to try to fit into the family dynamic. I didn't have to act a certain way. I didn't feel like I had to change anything about me, but they accepted me the way that I was. Something that comes to mind too was family cookouts and music and having jokes and stuff. They never see me as somebody who was just like separated. When they joked about everybody. We all had just so much fun, and I never felt excluded. Another story that comes to mind too is when I first moved into my foster parents' house, I didn't have a lot of clothing items. And the first thing that they did for me was like, okay, let's get you all situated. Let's make sure you have the things that you need. So the advocacy piece, the way that they advocated for me as if they were my actual parent, was something that also helped me to feel like safe. And I knew that they had my best intention in mind. So.
Safety is so important, and I've been asked to speak on this topic a number of times. And safety and cleanliness, I mean, those are the foundational. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, that's the part that's so important, and the cultural is also important. Safety, belonging is really at the crux of that ladder. Demetrius, if you add.
Yeah, of course. So now, so first I want to say, during my 22 more or less years in the foster care system, I lived with approximately 30 different families. So, you know, I have a lot of different folks that I've lived with in different ethnicities, et cetera. But I'm thinking right now specifically about my last foster family. And the only reason why I use foster is for context, but I never addressed them as foster mom, and none of that, because our relationship exceeds those titles. In any case, so this family, the Greens, is different from the Napolitanos who adopted me, my second adoption, and then the Johnsons who adopted me the first time. So this is a third family. And so this is the last family that I lived with as I transitioned out of the foster care system. So I moved in with them from 18 to 22. And I remember just many times, I remember one conversation I had with my foster dad, but he said to me, Demetrius, pulled me to the side, he said, how many times have you said in the heat of moment, in an argument, oh, you're not my dad, or, you know, I can leave this place and you're not this person to me. And I thought about it. I was like, you know, a few times, maybe a couple of times. And he said, how many times have I said to you that you're not my son? And never, you know. And so that, and then other times when I'm just in any one of my foster family members where they'd be like, oh, Demetrius, go call your nephew, or go call, oh, your mom has it, or your brother has it. And just that term in itself, your brother, your mother, your sister, your nephew, that is the constant, or at least in my case, it was constantly reminding me that, oh, this is my family, that I am valued, I belong, and this is my brother. So it becomes that possessive instead of, oh, go call, my brother, or, even when I'm talking to my sibling, they'll be like, oh, I just spoke to my mom, or, and they're instantly catch themselves because it's just that constant reassuring that I do belong, that I matter, that I am a part of this community.
So words are so important is what I'm hearing, right? And so, and that was, again, really powerful for me as I'm sitting here, as I keep having to flip to the moderator hat, that I'm not an attendee just listening. But the idea of, that statement of, I've never said that you weren't my son, right? Please don't say that you're not. I became a kinship foster parent to my brother, and I remember being in that role of parent and him saying that to me. But yeah, there has to be a bit of, we want you here, right? That has to be there.
I just want to add on real quick for the question. So a little bit about my experience, just again, having Alexis adoptive parents as my parents, my in-laws now, being like, I grew up in like Black communities, Black families and all that, but one problem that I always had being around her family is feel like I can never really be myself, and always feeling the need to kind of code switch sometimes and kind of like talk a certain way. Like, I'm around my biological family. I love, because we write about this in our book. It's like when I'm around my biological family, we watching the Lions game, we yelling and screaming at the TV, maybe a little bit of cussing a little bit. But, we are able to kind of authentically be ourselves and talk and just laugh and laugh about the simple things. Sometimes, even though it is more of a healthy environment being around her family and her parents, it kind of got like, just felt so uncomfortable and out of place sometimes, when we just sit in the living room and read sometimes, and it's so quiet and nobody's talking sometimes. It's just so awkward. Like, I wanted to laugh about the small things, and it got to a point where I was just code switching a lot, and like the way I talk, the way I act, and sometimes I would say a word and pronounce it like in a way it's like, man, I feel so uncomfortable how I just said that, and it wouldn't feel right in my spirit. And I talked to Alexis about this, and she said something that really changed me and impacted me. And she said that you can't, they won't even get the chance to love you until you're authentically being who you are. And I really, that really hit me, and like, wow, like I'm being like a version of myself that's not really me. So, even if I, has some improper English or whatever around them, broken English, whatever, I just talk the way I talk, and I am the way I am. And I feel that, they're able to respect me more because of who I am. And the way I talk and act, that doesn't take away from my intelligence or who I am, or, who I am overall, and what I can provide and what I can do. It's just a part of who I am in my culture. And with her saying that to me made me feel open enough to be myself, and, just accept them more as family once they were able to accept me with who I am.
So just wow, because I'm a mom of teens, and this carries for generations too, right? So my husband is Black, my kids are Black. This carries for generations, because when we're with our white family, that comes up. Can you explain, Justin, code switching for those that might not know in the audience?
So, I'm sure somebody may have a better definition of code switching, but for me, it means like, a lot of people say that, Black people and white people, it's like we almost speak two different languages sometimes. And based on not just because, inherently your race, but just how the culture you grow up in. Sometimes in Black communities, we may say, we may have slang words or speak a certain way, or it's just certain things that, within Black communities that we know what it means, and we act a certain way and do certain things. And when you are out of that environment, let's say you take a Black person who's in this environment and put them in a different culture or environment. It's not even just, it may be a white community, a white person's culture, but when you take them and put them in a different culture, they start to act different and use different words, and you just start to talk a certain way and act a certain way. And it's the cultural influences and pressure that you feel to act different and not be yourself. And I mean, that's still something I deal with to this day. And I'm more comfortable with her family. But if I'm in a professional setting where it's all white people, I just feel the pressure to like code switch and not be myself. And it's basically, just taking someone from one culture and they're in a certain environment that's different than what they're used to. And then it kind of starts to try to change and adapt to the environment that they're in, not in a good way, more of in a less authentic way.
It's so important. And even as my 18-year-old daughter has her first semester at college, she is finding her way and with friend groups and things like that because of what she's been exposed to as part of my background. So very fascinating. There's a comment in the chat, and this is from one of my coworkers who is also, also grew up in foster care. And she's got a comment in here that there's a stigma that we should just be grateful to be cared for. And that especially carries and transcends into race, especially as, and I don't want to bring politics in this, but there was with Amy Coney Barrett, I think that's her name, I don't want to get it wrong, but that she has children who, she adopted from Haiti, and she spoke of them in much a different way than she did her biological children. And she talked a lot about their trauma instead of their accomplishments. So if you Google that, you'll see how she spoke about her children in her hearings, the kids from Haiti versus, the children that I think that she gave birth to. So do you have anything to add to that? I'm not using the questions that we got here, but, do you have anything to add to that about this, this general feeling that we should be grateful for being cared for?
I think that's something that happens often. And I feel like being cared for is not something that should be added on like a necessity. It's something that's supposed to be like a basic need for every human being. Feeling cared for, feeling, like I mentioned earlier, safe. And I feel like it happens often. Even working with kids in care, I feel like sometimes there are moments where they feel too like, okay, somebody caring for me and showing me that they care is a privilege when it's really supposed to be something that is always supposed to be happening from the time that they were born. It's not something that is supposed to be just extra or whatever. So, yeah.
And I had a thought on that as well. Just when I hear that, like, that, being cared for is a privilege on our end, it kind of reminds me of the idea of maybe white volunteer workers or families going to try to adopt a kid from an African country or something like that. And, oh, look at this poor little child we're coming to save and be the hero for. Mm-hmm. And that's how a lot of times foster youth are treated. Like you're being like a Superman, you come to scoop this little, poor little kid up who's had all this trauma and everything. You're about to come be the superhero. But, I've talking to her parents and other healthy foster parents, not trying to sound like arrogant or anything, but it's a privilege on their end to interact with us and to raise us. And this should be a mutually beneficial relationship. It should be a mutually beneficial relationship where I can learn from you, you learn from me, and we're just two human beings growing together and trying to love each other. And I think that's just a huge problem that a lot of foster parents and agencies and advocates have to change their approach for. Just, you're not a Superman, you're not a superhero trying to save these kids, but someone who can build a mutually beneficial relationship. So if you are a white parent or a white family trying to learn more about Black culture, or whoever, if you adopt this a child of a different race, trying to learn more about their culture and who they are, and see how you can be an advocate and see how you can be an ally.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, so much of that, the words that foster parents are speaking really feeds into the fear that foster youth have of being that burden on that family. And like for me, I moved in with my foster parents the day before my foster mom's birthday, and I apologized to her and I'm like, I'm sorry I ruined your birthday. And she's like, no, this is my present. Like, thank you for moving in. Thank you for being here. And that just really changed so much for me, because I just constantly try to think, how can I take up less space? How can I be less of a burden for people? Like, how can I help and support people versus being a burden on them? And she's never once made me feel like that burden, more as a gift. And And so words, again, as Demetrius said, mean so much.
And even for my parents, you know, they have grandchildren now that they wouldn't have had if they hadn't fostered and adopted us. So I feel like I gave them a gift too. Just saying. Demetrius, go.
Facts, absolutely. If I could just piggyback off of what Alexis just said, a lot of the youth in foster care, you know, we go through so much trauma. So we, as far as us feeling, so all the trauma that we go through, we eventually feel as if it's a burden to be around us, to be in our space, to love us. And so I hear the person who says, you know, you should be grateful to be cared for. And while we ought to be grateful for every heartbeat and every breath that we take, and ultimately, yes, we need to be grateful and show that appreciation for those who care for us. But those the caregivers, they have to be patient with us, because we have, once again, when a young person's, when we feel that we have become a burden, we are and we have all of the trauma, we don't know how to be grateful to receive love from folks, and we don't know how to accept it because we've been shown the opposite during our entire upbringing. So yes, we have to be grateful for it, the love and the compassion, etc. But the caregivers, all of those adults and folks in our lives who are supposed to be there to care for us, they also have to be extremely patient.
So, you know, I didn't become grateful, and I think I'm older than most of the panelists here, but I didn't become grateful until I was a parent and a foster parent. I didn't get it until then. And so I think that's pretty key, what you just said about the trauma. It's hard for us. It really is. And I don't know that we should have to be grateful, right? So there's several really good questions coming in the chat. And we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to switch a little bit from our questions that we started out with. One is suggestions for social workers currently working to find permanent families. What can they do to make the adoptive process easier on kids? So anybody who wants to kind of take that. Yolanda.
I'd say for that, to make sure that the youth's voice is also involved in the process. I think that's what makes it easier, when they know that they also had some type of say in the process, not just put on them, but went through the process and is aware. There's transparency, honesty the whole time. I feel like that would be very helpful in the process, and just making sure the youth is involved.
Yeah, and to add to Yolanda, and making sure that this is not something that the social worker wants, but that this is also what the child wants. And many times my former social workers and folks who worked in the adoption community I felt like they were kind of pushing it down my throat, like, oh, go get adopted. This is the best. You don't know what's best for me. I have to give me the time to really find out what's best for me. But if you're putting this down my throat, then it becomes, especially with my first failed adoption and not practicing that patience that we just spoke of moments ago, then that can make the young person eventually reluctant and not hesitant to even consider adoption.
Also, I would just add on and say, I think letting youth know that there is a community of people here to support and to your support, not just even the parents. You have a community or a church or whoever is around here to support you and here to help you. And a lot of times for me, going into different situations, it felt like I had to do whatever it takes to satisfy my foster parents or whoever I'm living with so I don't get kicked out. But I think to help youth with the transition process, let them know that, you know, you are for them, you want them to succeed, and let them know that you're not willing to give up on them. And that was one of my big issues, that going from home to home, it just feels like people kept giving up on me. And not that I wasn't, you know, just like a perfect little angel. I was doing like a lot of stuff wrong too. But it got to a point where, like, man, like, I don't even think this situation is gonna last long that I'm going into, because it happens over and over again. Now I keep getting kicked out. And now, should I even put forth the effort, or will they love me? Will they want me? How long would I stay? I'm expecting to leave. I think that helping kids transition means that letting them know that they have a community that they can go to. You know, if you're upset with me or like a foster parent, if you're upset with the foster parent, you have mentors and other people you can cope with and help you out in the situation. Also, letting youth know that you won't give up on them easy. You won't give up on them, and letting them know that you will be with them through the entire process.
That is the biggest key, is letting them know that you won't give up. Because even with my brother, who I had to keep telling him, I had to keep letting him have challenges, and he's doing well. The other question that was in here was on code switching, but as I read it, it was about video games and guns and violence. And in my feeling, it's not code switching. That's not about code switching. That's about, I think, philosophy and parenting and things like that. So code switching, in my mind, is very much about some of the cultural nuances. Would you all agree?
In the context of race, yes.
Yeah. So I am just going to go back to, this is really important. This question: would you say that alienating a child's race and identity can lead to self-esteem issues? And I would ask how. I see Yolanda's nodding, but I would just ask how.
I think that it would a lot, because I feel like our identity is also related to our race. You can't miss somebody, when you look at when you not only just looking at somebody, but when I understand who I am and my culture, it helps me to be proud of who I am. It helps me to, identify with different communities. It helps me to understand, what the paths that my ancestors took and what they have gone through and overcame so that I can have opportunities now. I feel like in regards to self-esteem, I feel like for me personally, I feel like it would be hard for somebody to really understand who they are. And when you don't understand your true identity, if you don't understand where you come from, sometimes it can have an effect on their self-esteem. Yeah.
And if I could just quickly add to that, the young folks in foster care, we are more or less already have self-identity issues, because we more or less we haven't had experiences with our biological families, or maybe they've passed on, or maybe they're incarcerated, but we can't just go into our parents' bedroom and be like, hey mom, can you explain to me what it means to be Black, or things of that nature. We are deprived of that, unfortunately. So instead of, if you try to alienate it, or the child's identity, and don't try to help them understand what it is for their identity, if you don't try to help them bring their identity out and help them understand what it means to be specifically their unique selves, then that it's just going to add to their complex ideas of their own identity, because now it's just another person in my life making me question my identity, or telling me that this isn't my identity. And so it's a major disservice.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to add to that, going back to my little adoptive sister, just observing her behaviors of being that mixed child in a white family. And for an example, like one night she was playing Sims, and she wanted an all white character with blonde hair, and she's this like beautiful mixed child with beautiful curly hair, and to see her wanting a different color and different hair, everything than what she has, and to not own that and love that. And so just my mom and I are constantly speaking like words of affirmation, like, we love your hair, we love your skin, that is who you are, you're a beautiful woman, and like speaking these positive things into her. And then I'm doing my best of like bringing positive like references and other things around, or resources around her, of that representation of buying, like I got her several different books of, I forgot what it was called, like I love my hair and I love my skin or something like that. I can't remember the book title, but just like constantly reaffirming that, because she says things like, I don't like the color of my skin or my hair, because when I'm with you in public, people don't know that I'm your daughter, or people don't know that I'm your sister, because I look different than you. But that may be what it is in her 10-year-old mind, but that's going to turn into such more deep rooted issues later on, far beyond that. And that's what I'm worried about and try to be proactive on. And so seeing that within my own family with my little sister, that it's just, it kills me seeing that stuff. And then knowing that my child one day will go through similar situations, because I don't know any mixed child that hasn't had a sort of internal debate of, do I choose my white side or do I choose my black side? And like, which culture do I choose? Who am I? And so knowing that that's going to be a struggle that my child deals with, I'm like, this is like a little test for me to learn from.
Well, so I have my sister who is biological on both sides and we were both adopted in the same family. And I very much connect more with my black side, and she very much connects more with her white side. And I used to try to change that in her, but I have to realize that that's who she is and who she wants to be, right? And so it is an evolution. But even my own children who are more black, they look at me and say, "Mom, well, you're half white." And so do you have this? Do you have the same perspective we do? They sometimes say that I don't, and so yeah, so that happens in families in general. So it's very important to keep it in mind and then allow that space, right?
I think one of the key words that Alexis says was owning it. Like, regardless of where you come from, what the circumstance may be, your background, just teaching our youth to love their self fully. And, those books I feel like are so important so that they can have a representation and identify with people that look like them. I feel like the more that we teach our youth and the more that we have, the youth see representations of different multiple, different races and people in general, they'll see a representation of themselves somewhere and be confident knowing that they see people who are successful within that specific race or whatever.
So there's only 6 minutes left. I can't believe it. I could talk about this all day. There's a question in the chat on advice for teachers, or how to deal with teachers, advice to deal with teachers who keep pushing those family trees. I have my own perspective on that, but I want to hear yours, and then I'll kind of top mine at the end. You're all thinking.
I think, well, one of the things that we do that came to my mind, the first thing that came to my mind, and instead of doing a family tree, maybe trying to do something that represents the supports of the youth that are around them, and helping them to identify who they see as their mom, who they see as their dad, rather than bringing it back all the way to maybe people they're not even really aware of. So
I think that's a great answer. That's a great answer. Do the rest of you agree? Alexis, you're on mute. I don't know.
I was explaining Yolanda's answer there. But yeah, I always hated the family tree. Like, I remember, like, even in Spanish, trying to teach you like mom and dad and different phrases and different words and stuff. And like as a kid, and that is just always so painful. Like when you don't have that figure. And I've been wrestling with that idea of how do you go about that. And like, even on like Mother's Day and Father's Day and things, like I love, well, now that I have my foster care community, because it's so tight knit, and it's like once you find people in foster care, it's like those are my people, and you get it. And like say on holidays like Mother's Day, Father's Day, or whatever, there will be different posts that say like Happy Mother's Day caregiver, like all these like slash like the 15 different names. And it's really, again, like owning that and being honest that we have or acknowledging that we have other people in our lives that are not just a mother and who is blood to me. And that also goes back to one of the greatest things that I learned for being a foster care is that I have the power to choose who's in my family and who's in my community. That blood doesn't mean loyalty or any of those things, that I get to choose that. And when you use other words other than just mom and dad or in the family tree, that's allowing ownership of the youth to say who is in my community and who have I chosen to be in that community and in my family versus what has been placed on me from birth. And again, that helps try to build, acknowledge those boundaries and move past that.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Me, I spent my life trying to find the leaves on my tree. And I don't know that I want to put it on display for a school project, but I think it's important to recognize the identity of a child, and that they are going to be searching, and I was always in the phone book trying to find my father. And when I did find him, I ended up raising one of his kids, my brother. So there's pieces that I think we have to explore as foster youth, but maybe not necessarily put on display for all to see. And I don't know that it's a teacher who should be asking those questions, but I still think it's important for us to know who we are, if we can. Go ahead.
I was going to say really quickly, I'm not sure if we're able to get to the question, but I wanted to just say, like, one of the things that overall could have made a difference when I was in care. Is that one of the questions I'm going to get to, or something?
Yeah, it was. We won't have time to get to them all.
Oh.
Go ahead and share.
I think one of the most important things that would have made a difference when I was in care is mentorship. If I had somebody, even if it wasn't, if a kid doesn't have their mom and their dad, if they have somebody that they're able to really recognize, the potential in them and see all that they can do and give them, an idea of vision and purpose and hope, that can be so helpful so that they can avoid some experiences and really get on a journey and path to become who they were meant to be and create, the family, whoever they want, who they identify as family for themselves. So, yeah.
So someone is asking you to be a mentor, just so you know.
Oh my God.
Yes, I second that. I second that, absolutely. And I think all of us would agree that we've had people in our lives who have played that role. And sometimes it's the same race, there was a question that was way up in the chat around that of having, are there, and I'm assuming that Adoption Rhode Island or NAACP are tracking some of these questions and can respond, but it was, how do I get someone in my daughter's life who can give her that perspective? I know for myself, I went to cosmetology school, so I was able to deal with my own hair, but I think it's important that, as a parent, the hair is key and important for a child to be able to feel like they can work with it and know how to use it. And sometimes I can tell, and I hate to say this, but I can tell when a parent, doesn't have to be adoptive or foster, doesn't put the effort into their child's hair.
And hair is definitely important when it comes to, I feel like every community, but specifically the Black community, it's definitely part of the culture. So.
All right, any closing words? One word that you want to leave before we close today? That wasn't part of the questions.
We just have to, I'll feel wrong if I didn't, but we got to get a shout out to our book again, Redefining Normal. Again, this is a book that teaches advocates, foster youth how to overcome, how to figure out life, beating the odds and overcoming so many different things. And we like put our diary into this, our personal diary. It feels like.
Uh-oh, they froze.
And also just show methods of.
Sorry. Yeah, you're freezing a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know they froze, but I'll make sure I send out the information for their book and resources. And also Demetrius has some great services to offer. So I'll make sure I share that with everyone afterwards as well.
All right. It's been powerful.
And as we close out, I wanted to thank all of you, Michelle, Demetrius, Yolanda, Alexis, and Justin. Thank you all so much for sharing with such honesty and such vulnerability, both the challenges you faced, but also the love you've encountered, what has been helpful in your experiences. I know it's been helpful to everyone. I see so many comments in the chat for both parents, people who work in the field, people who are considering it, people who have been in foster care, adoptees themselves. You sharing your experiences is so powerful and takes so much strength. So thank you for sharing that with us all. And as we wrap up, I'll make sure all of your information I share with our participants. But coming up, November is National Adoption Month. So make sure you follow Adoption Rhode Island on social media to keep updated on all of the great things that are going to be happening next month, all the events and other ways to stay involved and stay connected. And the NAACP, their big priority right now is a program called Souls to the Polls to make sure that everyone can get to the polls and vote by Tuesday. So they're also accepting donations, and any support people can provide would be super helpful. So thank you again for all of our panelists and Michelle for facilitating. And then also thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. We're happy to be able to bring people together and to be able to connect and share ideas and experiences that ultimately will help more children and families.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
It was
Thank you, everybody.
all of you too, by the way.
Bye. Thank you, guys.